Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Quack&Code, where we do discussion and also code around. And in this episode, I have someone I was wondering why is not been there yet on this live, because I've been talking quite a lot about evidence, which is going to be the topic of today, but just in general of BI as a code tool and how it's changing. But if that doesn't really, sounds familiar to you, the BI as code tool, don't worry, we'll dive into that. And so I have Archie from Evidence, which is there. So hello.
Hey, Mehdi.
So how you,
so excited to be here.
Yeah, how are you? It's been I think it's been a while that we met in person. I think the last time was at DBT Coalesce last year, right?
Yeah. I've been doing well. I've actually had a small kid since then, so life has been pretty new. Sleeping a little less than I might otherwise, but otherwise it's been really great. But yeah, I'm really excited to join. I feel like this has been a long time on the cards.
Yeah, cool. No, so yeah, that's handling everything, parents life and dashboard live. So tell us a bit, like I'm curious because I actually don't know the story myself on your evidence, like really the starting story of evidence, and how did you come and join the company before diving into what it is exactly.
Yeah, so I was actually looking at starting my own business. I moved to Canada, which is where I live now, maybe about 3 years ago, and I was trying to start my own business in kind of the data space at the time, but that didn't really go anywhere. And when I was trying to work out what I wanted to do next, I was sort of investigating a few different ideas around, particularly around data visualization and how you could do better data storytelling. And then I came across these two guys, Adam and Sean, who when I saw what they'd done, I was like, this is what I should have been doing, So I talked to them, and one thing led to another, and I ended up working there. But I was just really impressed with their whole approach to they were taking to data visualization and bringing metrics and data to companies. And I felt, at least from my experience before, so I used to run a BI team at an e-commerce company. A lot of the things that I felt were missing in the experience there, the lack of customization, the ability to sort of add commentary to the reports as you're making them to explain what's going on, all that kind of stuff. This is stuff that they were thinking about really, really carefully with evidence. So I was really excited to join.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what's exactly your background? You were talking that you were running a BI team. Are you do you define more yourself on the business side? Because evidence is kind of like more on the left software, like more technical people, right? How do you define your background and your persona in the data space?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have a slightly unusual background, but actually I think data is one of those spaces where lots of people come at it from all kinds of different angles. So I'm kind of typical in the sense that I'm atypical. So I started my career as a management consultant. So I was making lots of PowerPoint slides, basically, and that's quite a different experience, but you're still making a lot of charts. And so from that experience, I bring quite strong opinions about what makes a really clean, understandable chart for a business person. But then kind of the thing that I did after that was I moved into an e-commerce company called Patch Plants, based in London, UK. And I started there as the chief of staff, so not explicitly focusing on data, but was always having to talk to the data team, because we were always trying to make decisions, based on the data we had, and often we didn't have the data we needed to make the decisions. And so part of what I was doing was trying to lead the processes where we'd bring that data into our stack, into sort of Snowflake, Looker, that kind of thing. And we were big users of DBT there as well. And I kind of, in the end, kind of was just getting closer and closer to that team. And then eventually we ended up having a bit of like a reshuffle of our management team. And I started running that team as well, because it was something I was really interested in. I felt like I could add a lot with my experience. So it's a lot long. I learned SQL while I was there, and I got increasingly into using BI tools like Looker. But I am not a data engineer or anything by training. Any SQL and Python I picked up has basically been on the side. And so I guess I'd consider myself sort of a bit of a data generalist, without a better word. Yeah, and since I've been at Evidence, I've kind of been continuing that journey.
Yeah, but, it totally resonates with me saying that we in data people come from invisible background, and not to flattering you, but that's usually the best person I've met in the data space. I don't know. I feel like as a data person, we are tied with different stakeholder, different case, would it be technical or business, and having this versatile background, right? Not from typically computer science, helps you, I think, understanding different perspective from different people and their different needs. But let's dive, because already people are in the chat and they ask like, what is evidence? We have someone that say, I ask if they heard of it, and someone say, yes, in a previous BI as code video. So that we did on MotherDuck channel. So that's great. We had a couple of people that haven't heard of it, and there are somebody else. It is safe. Don't worry. Evidence.dev is a real company. All right. So let's a bit dive in. And what is evidence exactly? Maybe Archie, you can tell us.
Yeah. So evidence is it's a tool to make data apps using Markdown and SQL. So you hook up your database, and then you write SQL queries, and then you ingest those SQL queries in Markdown components, and then the output you get is kind of a website or web app, and that's in essence kind of all it is. And under the hood, we have sort of some pretty interesting stuff going on. But it's perfect if you are trying to build data reporting, but you're looking for something that's pretty lightweight. You can spin this up in 5 minutes. Evidence is open source, so you can just go to the Evidence GitHub repo. So Evidence.dev/evidence. You can start from there, run 4 commands in your terminal, and you have Evidence running on your computer.
Yeah, so someone asked, it's a good question. It's like Mermaid. I don't know if you know. I think it's a sharking library. So I think what's important to mention here is that the website, like the framework, is based on JavaScript, right?
Yeah. So and it's not something that is super important if you're a user. You don't have to write any JavaScript to use Evidence. You're just writing Markdown, sort of similar to syntax you'd use to on Slack, or if you're writing in GitHub, you do like a hyphen and a space and it turns into a bullet point, that kind of things. So Mermaid, as I understand it, Mermaid.js is the sort of tool that you'll use to build kind of flowcharts in the browser. So it shares some similarities to Mermaid. So it is like a JavaScript implementation. There's a lot more flexibility in terms of the types of charts you can use in Evidence. So there's a whole bunch. I think there's on the doc side a bit further down. There's a big gallery where you can see all of the different chart types, and we can maybe take a look at that a little later. But bar charts, line charts, maps.
Yeah, I can actually go. And I've here in the components, you have a page, I think, where you have all components.
Yeah, so exactly, tables, line charts, area charts, bar charts. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. So, and we've really focused on the charts that we think are kind of most useful for businesses. And on top of that, kind of giving you powerful tools to annotate and like interpret that data.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think what's important to mention is that there is like a tons of like JavaScript charting libraries, right? And if you want to build like an app, a data app with, dedicated for the web, so you're probably into the JavaScript world, right? You need to pick up, the JavaScript chart library, and then you need to bind into your data. So you need to find either the connector or the library to connect to your source. And then after writing some query and fetching into that, where Evidence abstract this for you, so going from 0 to 1 is much faster, right? There is existing components, and I think we have we have also, this is what I wanted to show. For example, an existing component here is that you define your data. We're going to see it later in the demo, and that's it. That's a SQL query result, basically, right?
Yeah. So I think that's an important point. So JavaScript plotting libraries. So there's high charts, e charts, Viz.js. There's just like so many of them. But they are typically pretty easy to get started with, but pretty difficult to make a chart that looks really nice. Like the one that comes out of the box, if you're using like any of them, like Plotly, whatever, it is a chart, but then you're going to spend 10, 15 minutes writing different configuration to get that chart looking like good enough to use, which is really boring. And then every time you have to make a chart, then you're rewriting all of that configuration. So Evidence is using actually e-charts under the hood, but we've done a lot of the configuration so that they look good by default. But then you can always change the configuration, if you want to change the colors or how the labels look on it, or pretty much anything about it within the e-chart stack. You can modify from there.
And so, see, if we zoom out a bit, and now that you have a high level understanding of what Evidence is, you define yourself as BI as code, and I think that's a pretty new recent movement. And when I mean recent, what is like three years ish, like this. Maybe I'm wrong, but this like at least as working for the past 10 years, that's the first time I kind of like heard that concept. What does that concept brings versus like standard dashboarding tools that people use commonly in BI?
Yeah, 3 years is interesting. I know Evidence has been good for 3 years. I wouldn't say everyone knew about tools like Evidence 3 years ago. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who are still discovering the idea of BI as code. But the idea here is you are, rather than a typical BI workflow for tools that people are the most popular and most used tools at the moment, Power BI, Tableau, Looker, those kind of things, is you are, once you have your data in your data warehouse and you've done all of the transformation to get it really clean, then the final step is someone building reports in the tool, and it'll be some kind of GUI tool, and they'll be dragging and dropping, kind of like a pivot table interface, drag this dimension onto the x-axis and this dimension onto the y, this measure onto the y-axis, and I'm going to split by this other dimension, which isn't a terrible workflow for creating dashboards, but where it gets really, really rough is that maintaining dashboards that have been built like that is really, really difficult, because every time you want to change something across, like you end up with an accumulation of 50 dashboards. You end up having to like go through each of your 50 dashboards and manually like do a drag and drop workflow to update it, and it can be quite error prone and that kind of thing. So and if you're running a business, 90% of your time as someone working on BI and data presentation is actually in the maintenance side of it. It's not in the creation. Creation is fast, but then your stakeholders are just saying, oh well, this there's something wrong with this metric, or we need to update this to account for this new thing. That was at least my experience. Was you're spending a lot of time like tinkering, and it's so frustrating when you have to do like loads of manual work to do all that tinkering, and you can't test it before you release it. So
yeah,
that's kind of where BI as code comes in. It's like, you're writing, when you're writing code to define what your dashboards look like, it's much easier to update them. You can just use sort of Control F to find all instances of the thing you want to update. You make the edit. You can then run a local copy of it on your machine to check it, looks correct. And then you run a deployment process. You can run that on a QA branch, so you can deploy it onto your QA. Maybe you have some test data that you're deploying it with. And you can check it correctly before you finally then merge that change into your main code branch, which then like deploys a new version of your site. So this sort of ideas of having version control and having CI/CD and testing really allow you to have a much more robust, but also sort of enjoyable way of maintaining your dashboards. And that's kind of what I think the magic of Evidence is. That it's like, there's something really fun, and we'll do some local development in a little bit, but like local dev is amazing. It's so fast, it's snappy, you get like instant responsiveness, and you just feel like so much more in control.
Yeah, no, but that's a pretty good summary. And I think to bounce back, I think in general, in data, like the development workflow have been broken in the sense that we rely on server proprietary tool where it's really difficult to kind of like mimic what you want to do locally, right? If I compare it to building a website, you write some HTML and you get the result right after, right? In data, you have a dependency with data, which makes hard, but a lot of like historical existing BI tool, has been relying on server and so on. And it's just like kind of difficult to kind of mimic things local and then push it to a different environment. And I think for a different environment, I'm curious your thoughts about that. But we can ask the audience, who is like, dreaming about testing their BI environment in different environments. So mainly development, staging, and production. So meaning like if you change something on a critical dashboard, for example, you can roll it out into a different environment that people can try before running into production. Because in my opinion, this is kind of a new education that's bring to those people where it's mostly like software engineering best practice, right? And those hasn't been applied in my sense on the BI world. But guess what? Like every metrics, every chart that you're seeing on your dashboard is a software asset. So you need to treat it as a software development process. So but some testing using versioning system like Git to have peer review, being able to deploy it on multiple branch. But I mean, yeah, I'm curious based on your users, like who is kind of saying, oh, I wish I had that. I always dreamed to have that. Or other people are more, oh, I didn't know we could do that. And we should do that, right? So what's the balance of kind of user you're seeing there?
Well, I obviously we don't talk to everyone that uses Evidence, which is one of the fun things about running like an open source company, is just anyone can download it and try it. But I talk to kind of two types of people. There's people who are familiar with using tools like Git and version control and GitHub, and have written like writing SQL is like a major part of their job. And often they'll have been using some other BI tool or Viz tool, and when they discover Evidence, they are just generally so excited to try it, because it's the first tool that has really taken the SQL writing experience and added like a version control layer on top of that, and a way to then on top of that like also visualize the data in a way that's really presentable. You can version control scripts and store procedures in your database, but you can't actually then use them to like deliver the data to people. So that I think is what's really kind of unique. And then the other thing that the other kind of person that we often encounter is someone who's been using maybe Tableau or something. They're not as familiar with Git or working on the command line or working locally and things like that. But they're often pretty excited about just how deeply customizable evidence is. You can start to feel quite constrained in most BI tools because you can't change a lot. You're always going to have like a grid of charts, or you're going to have to use sort of specific. You can always tell that a Tableau chart is a Tableau chart. They have that specific look and feel. And you have a lot more flexibility with something like evidence. But for those users, it's typically a bit more of a learning curve because they have to download Git for the first time and learn what it means to source control your code. So yeah, those I guess is my experience. There's two kinds of people.
So there is kind of like a trade-off in the learning curve for people a bit less technical. That is kind of like worth it. And I think a good analogy is DBT. DBT is a framework to run production SQL pipeline. And usually people from business used to do, copy paste into their UI or have a schedule button. And they didn't know about Git or terminal, and DBT can bring, that back of those software engineering foundation to them. And I can totally relate to what you're saying, Archie, that they're excited. They see that it was actually painful. That's not the norm of copy pasting a SQL query under a Google Doc with final V2 production query. So, but they used to do that, and I think that's the fun part, is that they don't know what they don't know, right? And then when they discover that there is this principle, which actually are just software engineering principle, but applied to BI, that's really nice. I want to cut off on one point. Maybe you can show off that you were talking about flexibility. Do you have a couple of examples that we maybe can see? I think you shared with me before, but I want to basically see how much of customization you can go today, and maybe you can talk about what it could be in the future. Let me actually, or you want to go ahead and share? But I have the example page.
Yeah, okay, that's where I was going to go as well. So you go for it. So
yeah.
So we just have a gallery of different examples of things you can do on evidence, but maybe let's go into, I think, maybe let's pick like a pretty vanilla evidence project to begin with. So I think there's one called North Star Report. I think you can see that one. So this is a reasonably standard, report. Oh, I just lost you for a second. Maybe it was me.
Yeah, and that's okay. Yeah.
So you have here just like a chart up front with some metrics, but you can also see you can add like target lines and configure zones that you want to draw people's attention to. You can also add stuff like a lot of commentary around why we're doing stuff. And I think someone mentioned mermaid before. So this is a mermaid chart. You can put mermaid charts in evidence as well. So you just invoke a mermaid component and tell it what you want to look like. But this is really powerful for explaining to people, why this report, what's it showing me, which is often a question people have when they're trying to use your internal data tools. Typically, if you're running a data tool in a business, there's always a Slack channel associated with it, which is constantly people asking questions about your data. It's what does this mean? Where does this metric come from? Is this correct? Why is this broken? It's just a constant stream of requests. And you can, as a company, as a data team, you can write documentation, but no one will ever read your documentation, is what I find.
No.
So to have them actually read it, you have to inline the information into the app.
So that's a really great point. I think storytelling, I think just dashboarding in general, or creating things that is readable in a chart is already an art. right? Like which kind of colors you're gonna go, and which kind of access dimension you're gonna use. But the other thing is like that people I completely underestimated. Even if they have that, it's exactly as you said. It's like how do you inline definition and information? Because indeed, like having separate definition of concept is it's pretty hard to maintain, and nobody's gonna read it. But having kind of a story over there. And actually, the best dashboard I ever seen in presentation in my career, and I've worked with a lot of BI tools, was notebooks, like Jupyter notebooks, like ad hoc reporting from a data scientist that say, yeah, I'm going to work on a specific like campaign or whatsoever. And it has a clear story because there is those inline information, right? A notebook kind of like word truth is vertical, right? And I feel like dashboard used to be more like horizontal or, but as much as you can on the horizontal things. So yeah, that's a really great point. Do you have another example you want to show off?
Yeah, why don't you if you hop back to the examples page, there's one that's a community member did about the like Titanic survivors and people who were on the Titanic, which I think is a pretty interesting one. And this one highlights kind of like some of the customization that you can end up doing. So this one I think is loading some data from like a Kaggle data set, and it's just analyzing how who the passengers were and whether they survived and what they looked like based on that. But you can see some interesting customizations this person's done. They've changed the color scheme, and they've also removed the sidebar. They've changed the logo on the top of the header. So like I think I can still pretty much tell this is an evidence app by looking at it. I recognize enough of like the charts styles and things, but it's definitely getting a little bit more customized. And then I've seen some people do some pretty wild stuff as well. I've seen people do the FC24 one, which is like some kind of football stats website. It's just next to the Titanic one. This one's kind of, in my mind, pretty mad. So this one is an evidence project as well, but like at this point, I'd say, it's kind of just like a web app, like data web app and things. So they've got some data in it, but then they've got all these like player stats and this heat map. It's pretty amazing, inlining all this information. And I think you can drill into some of these. I don't know exactly, but
yeah,
pretty cool. Like this is not something you could achieve in like your average BI tool. So this is kind of like the top end in terms of like customization that you can end up doing.
Yeah, no, that's great to see. I think that's, but aside from the customization, I think it's nice that you have kind of like opinionated ready component, right? Because I think, like as I said, it is pretty hard to just find like what's the right color to have something viable from the first go, right? So I think it's also a balance. Maybe you've been thinking internally. It's like how much customization we want to offer. It's like no, you don't want customization, otherwise it's going to be a huge mess, right? It's like finding this right balance on how much template you want to give.
It's an interesting point. I think the good thing about having your defining your like reports in code is that you don't have to show the user all of the options like all of the time if they don't want to enable them. So what we strive for is like it looks great out of the box with no customization, and then if you want to, you can just add customization properties to it. So you start with a basic bar chart, and then you're like, okay, actually I want to change the colors, so I'm going to do fill color equals blue, and then I want to change this other thing. So unlike if you're doing like a more of a like GUI driven experience, like if the user wants to find like a specific thing to edit, they're going to have like a long menu with like 100 different things potentially. And so at that point, it makes sense to cut down the number of things you can customize, because otherwise you could never present them all to the user. Whereas, in a code-based experience, it's just additional properties that the user can add themselves. So we basically allow you to change pretty much anything about your charts, because it doesn't really add burden to the person looking at the code or to the person writing the code.
So we haven't speak about how DuckDB is fitting evidence ecosystem. Maybe you can tell us about that, because we have obviously it's on the MotherDuck channel. A lot of people familiar and loving DuckDB. So how are you using DuckDB within evidence?
Yeah, there's let me share my screen for a second. So let me go to here. So the Evidence uses DuckDB in kind of two different ways. So the first is Evidence supports DuckDB as a data source. So Evidence has a lot of different connectors. You can connect pretty much any major data warehouse to Evidence. BigQuery, Postgres, Amazon, Snowflake, etc. And DuckDB is also an option there. So if you have a DuckDB file, or CSV files or Parquet files, which also can be used by DuckDB, you can include them in your project as data sources. That's nice. You can use DuckDB's really permissive SQL syntax to write queries there, and it's pretty compressed, and you can publish it alongside your app, so you don't need to if you don't want to add your credentials, you can do that. But that's kind of not the most interesting way that Evidence uses DuckDB. The most interesting way is actually inside the Markdown pages itself. So because if you're writing SQL normally, you have the option, you could write SQL against your BigQuery database, and you could also write SQL against your Postgres database. But then you wouldn't be able to join those two data sets together using SQL, because they use different SQL syntaxes, and because underneath there's two different databases. So Evidence actually ships with a DuckDB engine in the browser. So we're using DuckDB's WebAssembly package, which is a really cool project. And what that does is it means you have a database engine running inside your browsers, in Chrome or Arc or whatever you're using, and you can then execute new queries on the fly inside the browser. And what that means is if you've got 5 different data sources, you can be joining those data sources in the browser. You can be creating interactivity in the browser, so you can make little inputs, drop downs that user selects.
Yeah.
And when they do a filter action, the DuckDB in the browser is going to run that filter action. And because it's in the browser, it's just lightning fast. You're not waiting to communicate with the database to do that. And that's really quite different to how most BI tools would work in that situation.
Yeah, I think that there is, to be fair, BI tools implementing cache mechanism, but it is proprietary kind of technology, which has some limitation. So I think the opportunity there is that the caching can be done from any kind of source, right? And DuckDB has just this open file format that you can also leverage when you want to work to work locally. Do you have what's your thoughts about DuckDB WASM, and where do you see it could fit in Evidence, if you have any work done on that?
Sorry, question asking me?
Yeah. So where do you see DuckDB WASM, and maybe explaining quickly what's the difference between DuckDB WASM, because you're using the node module, right? As I believe.
So we're using 2 different parts. So when DuckDB is a data source, then we're using just normal DuckDB, the node package, and that's going to run it in on the server when someone is trying to run queries against their DuckDB, and it's going to create them like basically a cache that they can query. But the when we're combining sources in the browser, we're running the WASM version of DuckDB.
Okay, I see.
So we're actually using both.
Yeah, that I wasn't sure, so that's why I was asking. Okay, so yeah, so DuckDB WASM so that's the power. Maybe we can just to explain to the audience that so DuckDB can run in process in Node.js or Python, Golang, but it can also run in the browser through WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a technology where you can run a low-level code for high performance like C++ or Rust, and it's kind of a container and it's run in your browser. So there is no external dependency, and so that's also the beauty, because then low latency and everything is on the client. And now I think the next step is if you work with MotherDuck, so MotherDuck is also working with on a WASM SDK, right? And so you can have your data on the server and still and cached on the client. So that's what a lot of companies are starting to do, is basically be able to easily hydrate new data on the client and then avoid any compute on the server, because here we are talking about development workflow when you run locally. But what happens when you need to basically share your dashboard? Have you seen people? What kind of did you see some patterns using DuckDB and sharing? Like, do they put it on S3, or did you see other patterns than using MotherDuck to see working on the server side?
So I've seen. Are you talking about where people are deploying the websites, or where people are hosting their DuckDB?
I think it's an interesting point. Maybe we should talk first on like where we haven't mentioned really, I think, quickly. So we can mention, maybe you can explain like what's the next step after you have your evidence dashboard working locally to deploy it, and then where do you host the database?
Yeah. So Evidence is a web app that builds, at the end of the process, it builds a static website. So what that means is you've finished developing and you've written all your code, and then you can run it on your computer. You can run a build. So you run npm run build, or if you have a deployment service that's going to be like running this, it's going to be running this for you when you merge your code. And what that does is it compiles all the Markdown that you've written and turns it into HTML and JavaScript and CSS. And you don't really need to know about that, but that's kind of what it's building. It's building this like vanilla website. And it's a static website, which means that it doesn't have a server at all. You host it on some kind of serverless platform, somewhere where you can host those files, and that's all you need. So there's no live connection to the database that or the databases that you're running with when the app is running. It's just connected to the file server where you're hosting these like HTML, JavaScript, CSS files.
Yeah. So that can run on where it could run practically like Vercel, Netlify, or Evidence.
Netlify.
So that's what you're offering, right?
Yeah. So Evidence has like a paid product, which is Evidence Cloud, which is probably the easiest way to host your Evidence website. But because it's open source, you can self-host. Vercel and Netlify are good options for more sort of like hobby projects. But if you're deploying it inside your business, you might host it on AWS or GCP or some other platform like that. And that allows you to kind of mean that the data, if you're running a business, you often have like requirements, data sovereignty. You don't want it to ever leave your servers. And at that point, you might run it on Azure or something like that. So it's really flexible. You can deploy it anywhere. And having that. So someone's just asked a question. Maybe you can pop it up, which I think is a really good question.
Of course.
From Yasir around. So you need to rebuild and deploy anytime you want to refresh your dashboards. So you kind of have two options here. Whenever you merge a change to your code, then it will automatically rebuild and redeploy your dashboard. So if you merge it to your main branch of your code, then it will. But then the other thing you can do is you can set up a schedule to just refresh your data for you. So you can set that up to be as regular as you want. Many businesses or companies will run it like once a day. Once their data pipelines are finished running in the morning, then they'll update them. But I've seen people doing it, once an hour, once every 5 minutes. So you can get pretty low latency like that, and those are just running rebuilds, because it's a website. Those builds can be reasonably fast, which means you can get to pretty low latency like that. But yeah, you need to rebuild to update the data, in short.
Yeah, so that's a good point. We are running already on time, so let's go dive a bit into the code. So maybe you could go on a live server to show a bit the interactivity and what we have been discussed of this, JavaScript web server running, editing SQL queries, and having those components and having the view. So I'll add to stage here.
So I've got this evidence project running on my local computer, and let me kind of, this project is actually a dive into San Francisco's 311 tickets that are filed. So this, you've got the emergency number 911, and then if you just have like a service request, maybe like there's some graffiti or something like that, then you can file with 311 instead. So we're just exploring some of that data. And I've got here, this is running on my local computer, so it's on localhost. And on this side, I've got my, my Markdown file, which is turning into evidence. So if I make changes to my Markdown file, then it will change the app as I'm developing it, which is cool. And we are talking a little bit about how evidence works. So the first thing you have is SQL queries. So I've got this SQL query here. Maybe let me format it to make it a bit easier to read. It's just selecting the first date in the range, the last date in the range, and the total number of cases. And that is running SQL against my data source that I have, which is a DuckDB in this case. And then once I've got that data, I'm then able to use it. So I've got my query. This is called description, so I can see it here. And then I can see the data that it's returning from the database. And if I wanted to change this, if I wanted to do like some other operation here, it would then automatically rerun here. I'll do one of those in a little bit. And then below that, I'm using components. So here I have a component, which is this value component. And then I'm passing it the query called description. And I'm asking it for the count of the description. And then I'm also just determining, what the number format is here. So all of these things are then being used to look and say, oh, this dataset includes 100,000 rows, and that's the number that I'm pulling here. And if I want to make a change, maybe I wanted to show it explicitly rather than with 100K, I've changed the number format there. And yeah, because this is Markdown, it's not really white space sensitive for these components, so that's why I was just rearranging that just to make it easier to read. So you've got,
and just one thing I want to point out is that you do have the SQL query, the original SQL query. And I think that's also something that's missing in standard BI tool, because it's a bit less like drag and drop. So there is SQL query behind the scene which is happening, but you don't see them. And so if you want to track kind of a lineage things or saying how this thing was calculated, it is super hard with dedicated BI tool where it's interface and then there is an abstraction layer, where here it's just those SQL queries, so you can directly inspect them.
Yeah, that's a good point. So every query, every bit of data that's on the page has to have a query associated with it. So I'm looking at this trend data. Obviously, I can like download the data if I want, or have a look at the data, but more interesting is like, okay, where did this data come from? Like which table was it from? Which columns, what query did I run to get it?
I'm curious for the download data. Did you develop that because people were asking if they can have it in Excel?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, people are always, you should bring the data to where people are at, and in businesses, it's Google Sheets, it's Excel. So you've always got to be able to have that button, which is like, oh, what if I want to get this into Excel? So you can. You get it in a CSV, open Excel. They can get going. Yeah, but let me show you a couple of other features of how an evidence project works. So I've just had this main index page open here. So this sort of 60 lines of code, or so 80 lines of code, defines this page. I've got a few different things here. I've got this dimension grid, which is this thing here. And I've got this calendar heat map, which is displaying the data just like on a daily basis, so I can see how many cases there were per day. But I've got some other pages in the app as well, and I've got some other things that I've used to create this. So let me just show you a little bit more about how an evidence project looks. So an evidence project, it's a Node app, which means a JavaScript app that has that can run JavaScript on the server. And these two files are basically just logging the dependencies for the JavaScript app. And then the interesting stuff is basically happening in pages and sources. So sources is where you define any data sources that you want to connect to evidence. So I said you could create like a DuckDB or BigQuery or Snowflake. Each one of these you add as a new source in this sources folder. And here I'm using DuckDB, so this is a DuckDB file, and then I have a configuration file which is telling me which file to point at. And then I have a SQL query, and this is just a DuckDB query, and it's saying, okay, I want to go get all of the data from this SF311 table. And the fact that it's called cases and the source is called SF311, that means that's why when I have my SQL queries, I'm running it from SF311.cases. So it's turning all of these queries that I have in my sources into tables that I can access in my Markdown. But I don't just have this index page. I've got some other pages. I've got a page for each of the neighborhoods in San Francisco as well. And that's defined by this neighborhoods folder and then the index page for neighborhoods. And this is pretty interesting. So I can, go look at Mission and see what things look like in there, or Outer Sunset, and I can just look at the cases there and what category of things are happening there. Yeah, so that's go on, question.
Yeah, we have an interesting question here. For many BI tools, embedding reports into web application can be costly into a SaaS style application. And I think we have kind of a related question, which is this one. Are we able to start with an set and then build to in additional features like a standard admin dashboard? So I think what's happening, and I've used that in my experience, is that you have a SaaS application, whatever you have offering, let's say your LinkedIn, and you have an analytics page there, right? And usually they contact the data teams, and the data teams said, yeah, we have our BI tools, which are proprietary and so on. And so you have basically the product engineering team that need to build custom charts, right? To kind of like push back what is used for decision for BI, right? Internally to the internal product. Let's say if you are LinkedIn and you want to provide analytics to other users. So how do you see? Maybe you can first ask the easy question, right? This one, and then I'm curious to hear your take on how do you see basically people pushing back, operational analytics that I like to say.
Yeah. So the easy question you're saying on embedding, how you embed evidence?
Yeah, I think the easy question is like on regarding the fees, like the one I put it like here right now.
Sorry, I need to have a look at StreamYard again.
Yeah.
So the
so if there is if the cost is per viewer.
So there are a couple of different ways to embed evidence. You can have evidence. You can just embed evidence as an iframe in your app. So you have some kind of like authentication layer that is getting people into your app. You can build evidence websites to embed inside that app, and you can remove like the sidebar and the nav bar and the various like different bits and pieces. So you just have like the core like chart layout, and that embeds really well in apps. So and in terms of like hosting arrangements, like you can self-host that and deploy that on your own infrastructure. You can deploy it on Evidence Cloud. Like those kind of things are like you kind of have like your choice there. So if you want to embed evidence dashboards and self-host, you're not going to pay for anything. On Evidence Cloud, there's like an embedded option as well, and I think that's like quite dependent on like how many customers or like businesses or end users you want to like have look at stuff. But it's certainly less expensive than the like Tableaus and the Power BIs of the world. Like you can be spending like $500,000 or $1 million on embedded solutions with those products. They're really expensive for sure.
Yeah. And so what's your, so you actually answered my other question was like, how do people embed it evidences of like mostly through iframe, right? That's what you see.
Yeah. And then, you can also pass, if you need to, like pass information from your authentication system into the iframe to determine like which report you're serving, that kind of thing. So, if I have like, 10 different customers, I can read in from my authentication system and then pass that token into the iframe, and then it will fetch the right report for that customer. So that's kind of the setup if you're trying to do like a multi-tenant deployment of evidence. I think I've lost your audio, Mehdi. Maybe you're on mute. I'm not sure.
Yeah, sorry. I was off for a sec. So first off, the product looks really great. We have another question here. No, in many BI tools, embedded reporting can be. Oh, actually, it's kind of a duplicate. Sorry, it's LinkedIn being LinkedIn. So we already answered that. What I want to dive for closing is another example that I've also worked with Evidence and DuckDB and MotherDuck is DuckDBStats.com. And so you have actually, let me share you directly in the repo. So it is an end-to-end data engineering project. And you can actually, if you go to DuckDB Stats, you have the source code link here. That's actually a duplicate. But what is great with that is that basically it gets PyPI stats data from DuckDB, and you can actually, if you have a Python library, you can actually clone the project and just change one variable and start, feeding data on another Python library if you want. It's using Evidence, and it's using MotherDuck basically to hydrate the data. So whenever there is new data, happening to MotherDuck, there is a job, as Archie saying, on the Evidence Cloud, which is running once a day and getting refreshed. And what is actually nice, I found here, we were talking about, the story, etc., is that in MotherDuck, you have this mechanism of sharing, data sets. And whenever you have a DuckDB client, and so the shared data set is here. I actually just changed it recently, so it might be a fail live demo. I didn't plan to do live demo. But so here is just to show you, I have, a local DuckDB CLI, and I'm going to connect to MotherDuck with just doing attach. I have a token to authenticate to me to the cloud. And now if I show all the database, I have all the database actually here. And for example, I think I have already share it. It's already here, but I can attach it secondly. So now that's the share link, right, which is on the DuckDB stats website. And now I can query the data. I can start, I have all the data, raw data, which is feeding the report. So I think you have PI daily stats. And so this is the final table. And so you can also run a describe here. And you see, you can have a look directly at the raw data that someone has shared. And I think that's also the beauty of it. I wish if everything related to open data sets, right, that you have a dashboard and you can that much quickly, query the raw data set. That would be amazing. Yeah, that would be amazing. Instead of having a Google sheet somewhere and yeah.
The cool thing about that, Mehdi, right, is that anyone could have done that, right? Because obviously you're logged in as you and you made the data set, but I could log in and do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this data set is shared. Yeah, that's a really good point. This data set is shared and it's public. So I invite you to play around, also to look at the website. We're closing in. I think we had a couple of quite nice questions. Is there anything you want to add on the future of evidence? Like what are you hyped for? What's the next thing that you're looking into in terms of features?
I think I'm really excited about kind of quite a lot of things, but the thing that we're really interested in is how you can build really amazing interactive experiences. So one of the things that kind of can be really cool when you're building data apps is having because you can explore the data, the end user can explore the data really on their own, building more capability around drilling into different things. You click this part of a chart and then you pull up this data that expands into it. All that kind of stuff is stuff we're working on right now, and is kind of really interesting to me. I think it just makes it so much more of a so much more of an intuitive experience to try and understand what's going on in your organization or business. It's how people are used to experiencing apps now, is just with instant client interactivity. So I think that'll be really great, and we've got a lot of releases coming out with that, I think, in the next couple of months.
Cool. On that, you are right in time for a stand-up for people, I guess in the West Coast, maybe. But yeah, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Archie, for coming in. And I think
thank you for inviting
we'll see you. Yeah, we'll see you around. Probably maybe later. Let's see each other in 6 months. Where do you stand? And where MotherDuck stand, because I think it's also nice, right? DuckDB is evolving a lot. MotherDuck is evolving a lot. So I think it's also give opportunity to different products in the ecosystem like you folks to see how things are being evolved. Quack&Code is every month. The live will be on YouTube afterwards. You can check MotherDuck DB channel on YouTube. And yeah, have a great day, a great stand-up wherever you are, or a great evening.
All right.